So when I was a young adult, into high school, moving into college, I had a real problem with anger. Has anybody ever had a problem with anger? You don't have to raise your hand. Some of us might have had that problem in our lives. So for me, what that was is I was trying really hard to make everything work in my life. I was trying really hard with everything I knew, especially when I got into my first year of college. I was working constantly to get that 4.0. That's what I wanted in college, 4.0 the whole time. And I was working really hard at it. I was working really hard to make relationships work, to meet new people. And I was working hard. I was also running cross-country Division I, and I was not really fast enough to do that. So I was pushing myself right to the limit. And I was trying to make it all work on my own, and it wasn't working. And so that would make me feel really overwhelmed. And my response to feeling overwhelmed was to get really mad. And so I was really mad often, so much so that the freshman year, my first year in college, my roommate actually started to get really scared of me because I would break stuff in our room often. And so what I did, I thought, okay, I got to fix this. So I bought myself a punching bag. All right? I bought myself one of these freestanding punching bags, and so this was going to be my plan, okay, to get through life, is I was just going to beat this thing whenever I got mad. So boom, 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 right? I'm taking this thing out. I'm punching this thing all the time. Now, I won't go into the details of exactly what happened next, because it'd take a little bit long time to explain physically what happened here. But if you want to know exactly the details, and it's a little bit embarrassing, so I won't go into it, but if you want to know the details, you come find me later. But basically, one day as I was getting in a fight with my punching bag knocked me out. Yeah. It's pretty embarrassing. So, I mean, I didn't actually lose consciousness, but I did get a concussion. I got a concussion from my own punching bag. All right. Now, what this was, in my life, this was God smacking me upside the head. That's what it was. This was before I was a Christian. I didn't even believe in God at this point, but I can see looking back, God used it powerfully. So here's what happened after I got that concussion. All of a sudden, I had to, the doctor told me, you got to stop running cross country for a while. And I was like, yes, I get to actually stop. And I thought, I got to rest up. I can't be running after this 4.0 constantly. So I just sat around for a while and I got really peaceful. In fact, I became, as I stopped and just thought about where I was at life and started to focus on myself and just fixing what was inside of me, all this anger, I started to become more peaceful than I'd ever been in my whole life. It was a unique experience. And so I'll give you an example of what happened with this immense peace is that winter, I was in Louisiana, was where I was going to school, and I was going back to Washington State. I was going to take an airplane. That's maybe about a 5-hour flight, something like that. You got to switch. And on that flight home for Christmas, it took me 24 hours to get home. And I had some crazy experiences in the airports. At one point, first of all, we took off from New Orleans, and one of the engines on the plane went out. It failed. Now, a 737 can fly on one engine, so we turned around and went back. We made halfway where we were going, and then turned around and went back to where we started. And then they flew me to Washington, D.C., and I sat there for a long time, and then we got on the plane, and we sat on the plane on the runway waiting for it to take off for 5 hours. 5 hours. They kept saying, oh, they're about to de-ice the plane. It was really cold. They're about to de-ice the plane, and so don't get off, because it's going to happen any moment. For 5 hours that happened. What do you think people were like on that plane? I mean, seriously, there were guys pacing up and down the aisle like freaking out. You got to let me off this plane. No, sir, it's going to cause everybody to be delayed. We're going to miss our slot if you get off the plane. And during that whole time, because I had stopped, and in my heart, I had let go of control, this idea that I was in control of my life, I was in perfect peace. Actually, so much so that I was laughing to myself as some of this stuff happened. Because normally I would be that guy who was pacing back and forth in the aisle all super angry. And so nothing had changed in my circumstances. In fact, all this stuff was coming at me. More than it had been before. Nothing had changed at school. Nothing had changed in my cross-country life. Nothing had changed. In fact, all this stuff, awful stuff was happening in my trip home, and I was completely at peace. I was in the storm, but I was not overwhelmed. Now, here we are. We're in a new sermon series. This is for the fall, Community of Hope Church. This sermon series is called Breathe. You don't have to be overwhelmed. Wasn't that an awesome video we had at the start? You don't have to be overwhelmed. We've come back into the fall. We're now in our routines of life again, many of us, where we had been maybe in vacation mode or in at least a different mode. Now we're back into the regular routines of life. And life can be overwhelming. That's what we find in our modern world, isn't it? Many of us are overwhelmed. So it's a great thing that you're here today. We're going to run this series of messages just for 4 weeks. This week and then 3 more times, we're going to look at what the Bible has to say about how we cannot be overwhelmed, even when we're in the middle of the storm. Now, I got to warn you going into this message, we sang a song right there at the end before we entered into this message. It talked about God chasing us down and breaking our lies. There's no lie that we believe that he won't try to tear down. Why? Because he loves us. And some of what we're going to look at today, when we look at what the Bible has to say about how you cannot be overwhelmed, some of you are going to look at that and say, no, that's not true. That's not true. You're going to hear some of these things and your immediate reaction is going to be, no, that's not true. You're not going to believe what the Bible says is true. I know you might not believe me right now, but just wait. It's coming. It's coming. Okay, so as we start off the message, we're going to get into Proverbs. We're going to look about a little bit of what Jesus has to say about this. But as we go into that, let's take a minute and have a demonstration here, and let's all just breathe for a minute. Okay? So close your eyes. We'll just take a deep breath. And then breathe out. All right, excellent. So that's your image. That's where we're starting off. And that's what's going to happen. There's a way to do that in your physical body. You know, sometimes when you're overwhelmed, you need to just stop and take a deep breath. We all know that. And it changes the way our body is reacting. But also in our minds, in our spirits, in our hearts, in our life, we need to stop and take a deep breath. And it will change how things are happening, how we experience things in our lives. All right, so we'll start off here. We're going to jump right into Proverbs, and we're going to start off attacking a lie that many of us believe, okay? So we're going to jump into the book of Proverbs in the Bible, and we're going to look at chapter 4 and verse 23. So it's up on the screen behind me. Chapter 4, verse 23 says this, "Guard your heart above all else, for it determines the course of your life." Guard your heart. Now, it doesn't mean your heart that's beating in your chest, although you should protect that because you'll die without it if you didn't know. It means what's inside of you. What's on the inside of who you are is what determines the course of your life. Now, think about that for a minute. What is that saying about what does not determine the course of your life? What that means, if really what's on the inside of you is what determines the course of your life, then that means if you're overwhelmed, if you can't handle life, it's not actually your circumstances outside of you that are causing that. It's what's on the inside that determines the course of your life. I got a couple of quotes here for you from some more modern writers. This first one, I love it because it's really short. It's to the point. This is from Stephen Covey, who wrote this book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Some of you might have heard of it. It's about 30 years old. I at first thought this book was just going to be, some, get-rich-quick scheme because of the title. It's not. It actually comes from a lifetime of deep study in the Bible, of all things. And here's what he says, "I am not a product of my circumstances. I am a product of my decisions." He's saying the same thing that Proverbs chapter 4 said right there. One more quote for you. This one's a little bit longer, but it's powerful. So stick with me on it. This one is from Dallas Willard, one of my favorite authors and a professor of philosophy down in California until just recently when he passed away. Listen to this one. "Our life and how we find the world now and in the future is almost totally a simple result of what we have become in the depths of our being. In our spirit, will, or heart, From there, we see the world and we interpret reality. From there, we make our choices and break forth into action. Try to change the world. We live from our depths. And then listen to this. He clarifies, and this is amazing. Someone will say then, do you mean that the individual and collective disasters that fill the human scene are not imposed on us from the outside? They don't just happen to us? And he says, yes, that is what I mean. Yes, that is what I mean. Proverbs, the book of Proverbs in the Bible, has all this talk about wisdom. Wisdom is this thing that God has provided, truth, that if we take it into our lives, into who we are, it will give us what we need to deal with life effectively. So the message today as we look at breathe, we're going to stop, we're going to pause for these 4 weeks, and we're going to breathe, and we're going to try to find out how we can not be overwhelmed. And today we're focused on breathing in, drawing in what we need from outside of us, from beyond us. Just like I was trying to deal with life all on my own and make it all happen, I couldn't do it. I didn't have the resources within me to make life work. And trying to do it all on my own just made me really angry and made me fail. But if we seek God's wisdom and we draw it into ourselves, it will begin to change us. And it's what's inside of us that actually determines how our lives go and even how we view reality. Am I overwhelmed or am I just in the storm? So our first point for today, as we look at wisdom in Proverbs, is just this. And you can write this in your bulletin. You got a piece of paper in there with notes if you want to fill in the blanks. The first thing we need to do is we need to stop. We need to breathe. Breathe in the wisdom, guidance, encouragement, and strength that we need to grow. More important than anything else that we do, we don't want to just be trying to fix life on our own. All this busyness, we actually need to stop and take in the air that we need. Take in the nutrients that we need into our spirit, our hearts, our minds, who we are. That is more important long term than anything else you can do for the course of your life. Let's look a little bit more at Proverbs. And we'll see this filled out a little bit, explained in more detail. We'll take a look at Proverbs chapter 1, starting at verse 20. Follow with me here. This is an amazing scene is pictured here in Proverbs chapter 1. Remember, so wisdom, what Proverbs means when it talks about wisdom, is the truth about life that God has put out there. He's given it to human beings so that we can take it into who we are and actually succeed at life. And here's what it says in Proverbs chapter 1, verses 20 to 22. Wisdom shouts in the streets, wherever crowds gather. She shouts in the marketplaces and near the city gates, as she says to the people, how much longer will you enjoy being fools? Whoa! Won't you ever stop sneering and laughing at knowledge? Here's the picture that we have in Proverbs chapter 1. We have this picture of everybody's busy. Is that a picture that fits with modern life? Can anybody relate to that? Nod your head if you can relate to everybody being busy. Everybody's busy going about their business in the marketplace, in the streets. They're all reacting to life. Problems have come into their lives, relationships have come into their lives, work has come into their life, and they're all just have filled up all their time going around trying to fix all these things, do all the tasks that they have to do. And wisdom is pictured as this woman who's walking through the streets, calling out to people, and no one is paying attention. She's calling out to people, come this way. Pay attention to your inner life and to what God has shown you is the right way to live, and things will go well for you. But no one believes her. Everyone thinks, that's foolish, that's ridiculous, I'm too busy for that. I can't stop right now. I have to do this for that person. I have to work really hard to achieve this result. I don't have time to go and pay attention to wisdom. And so this is the first lie that's got a grip on many of us watching this online, many of us right here in this room, is that we don't have time to work on what's inside of us. The truth is we don't have time not to. Let's keep going here in Proverbs. We'll see a little bit more how this works in chapter 3. So Proverbs chapter 3, verse 14, we have a picture of what wisdom is worth. Taking in the truth of God into your inner life, what is the value of that? And it says this in Proverbs chapter 3, verses 14 and 15. Wisdom is worth more than silver. It makes you richer than gold. Wisdom is more valuable than precious jewels. In fact, nothing you want can compare with her. Now, many of us, if you've been in church, you've heard that verse, maybe in a little bit different translation. The question here is, do you actually believe it? And when I say do you believe it, do you live like it's true? If you were given the choice, hey, somebody says, or God says, I don't know, Magic Genie says to you, hey, you know what, I'm going to give you $10 million or one piece of God's wisdom that actually is put into effect in your life. $10 million or one piece of God's wisdom that's put into effect in your life. Which would you choose? Don't answer. I think for many of us, realistically, that would be a hard choice. We would be tempted for the $10 million, wouldn't we? It would seem like that $10 million could fix a bunch of problems that I have in my life, right? But what do we actually know about people who are just given a whole bunch of money? Does it fix their problems? No, it doesn't. One piece of God's wisdom built into your life is actually worth more than all of that money. And yet, we spend a lot of our time chasing money, even those of us who aren't people who just want to get rich or only care about money, but we see problems in life, and money is something we realistically have to deal with, isn't it? And so we think we have to spend all of our time sometimes seeking after those things, but wisdom is worth far more than gold. Let's move a little bit further in Proverbs, and we'll look in chapter 4, and this is chapter 4, verse 7. The beginning of wisdom is this: get wisdom. The beginning of wisdom is this: get wisdom. Even if it costs you everything you have, get understanding. It's worth more than anything else that you want or desire in your life. And so, I'll give you a couple of illustrations here to think about this, right? I mean, imagine the ridiculous nature of somebody who, maybe they're drowning, okay? They're in the ocean, and they're trying to tread water. They've been on a ship, and the ship sank. They're overwhelmed by the water around them, and they're just barely treading water. And somebody throws them a life preserver. And they say, I can't grab that life preserver. I'm too busy treading water. Right? That would be absolutely absurd, isn't it? That's exactly what Proverbs is talking about here. Here we are in our lives, treading water, overwhelmed, so busy, and our only response is to try and tread water faster. But wisdom is calling out there's a life preserver. God's provided it. He's provided it through His Word, through His church, through Jesus Himself. Are you willing to take the time to grab it? Or another illustration here, let's just think about breathing itself. What if I were to hold my breath and try to do everything that I had to do in my life? And I said, you know what, I am too busy. Actually, I have so much to do that I'm too busy to breathe. How long would I be able to keep going? I mean, it's absurd, right? It's so absurd that you may be not even laughing because it's too absurd to be funny, right? If I held my breath and tried to preach this sermon, well, I wouldn't even get to the next verse. But if you hold your breath and try to do everything in your life, you're just going to collapse. So the second point that you can write into your bulletins today is this: you are never, never too busy to breathe. You are never too busy to breathe. It's just not possible for you to be too busy to breathe, because breathing is what allows you to do anything at all. You're never too busy to breathe. Let's move forward and take a look at something that Jesus has to say here. And this is powerful. Jesus taught on exactly what we're looking at here in Proverbs. Proverbs was written way before Jesus was around, but when Jesus was on the scene, he looked out into his world. He looked out into the people around him at that time, 2,000 years ago, and he saw, guess what? Exactly what we see today. He saw, he didn't see people all caught up with their phones. He saw people all caught up with their fishing nets and with their, making special food, and they're traveling all over the countryside. And he saw people caught up with different things than we're all caught up with today. But he saw exactly the same thing that we see today. People who were harassed and helpless. People who were overwhelmed by life. They didn't have the resources they needed to deal with life effectively. And he spent a lot of his time calling out to people, there is a way you can succeed at this. But in order to do it, he had to break lies that people had believed. One of the lies we've already addressed, that is the lie that I'm just too busy to pay any attention to this. I can't put any more energy. That would be extra. In fact, it's the only thing that lets you keep moving forward. But there's a second lie. A second really important thing that Jesus is trying to get across to us. So we're going to turn now to Matthew chapter 11. And we're going to look at the words of Jesus starting at verse 28 and then up to verse 30. These are some verses, probably you've heard these before. These are powerful words from the greatest teacher who ever lived. Listen to him as he looks out at all of us tired and overwhelmed. If you are tired from carrying heavy burdens, for many of us in here today, that describes you. This is Jesus speaking. If you are tired from carrying heavy burdens, come to me, and I will give you rest. Take the yoke I give you. We'll talk about that in a minute, what exactly he means. Take the yoke I give you and put it on your shoulders. Oh my goodness, wouldn't that be more work? And learn from me, for I am gentle and humble, and you will find rest. Rest for your souls, because this yoke is easy to bear, and this burden is light. Now, at this time, Jesus had been doing an incredible amount of work. He had been traveling around for years. He had been traveling around working 7 days a week. He wasn't even taking a day off most of the time at this point. He had been ministering to people, helping them, healing people, teaching people constantly, to the point where those people who were working with him, his closest friends or his disciples, they were exhausted. They were falling over half the time. Jesus was working incredibly hard. Very often he was staying up all night praying. He was doing far beyond, in fact, what any of us are even called to do. And yet he looks out at the crowds and he says, come, follow my way, because my way is easy. And it's actually super light. What does Jesus mean? How can this be? How can the way of following Jesus, isn't religion, isn't Christianity just an extra thing that gives me even more to do in my life? Isn't Sunday morning just a burden? I have to get up. I have to get up every other day of the week. And then I have to get up again on Sunday morning. Oh, that's so difficult. Isn't that just an extra piece that I can't really handle in my life because I got so much else going on? Well, the answer is that it can be. And many people, sadly, experience the way of Jesus and church just like that. Like it's this extra thing that they can't handle. But there is a secret. There is a secret that's been crying out from the pages of the Bible for thousands of years. There is a secret that Jesus lived, that millions of people have lived, that turned that, what looks like into a burden, into a powerful engine that will drive you forward in your life. And Jesus is trying to bring this secret across to us right here in Matthew chapter 11. Let's think about what he says for a minute. Come to me, all of you who are tired and worn out from carrying all this heavy burden, and I'm going to give you rest. And then he gives us this image. He says, take my yoke upon you. So let's have the image of the yoked oxen up here, because the unfortunate part of this illustration is that Jesus was really good at looking around. He looked around whoever he was teaching, and he would just grab stuff that was in the environment around him, and he would use it to illustrate a powerful lesson about life. And because it was something that everybody knew about, it really, really worked. Unfortunately, not many of us have oxen anymore. And not many of us even know what a yoke is, really. Maybe we have some vague idea. But we miss actually the point of what Jesus is saying here because we don't know. So what we have here is a picture of oxen, two oxen yoked together. And this is exactly what Jesus is getting at here. There are instances where oxen had a yoke. So the yoke is the thing around the oxen's neck. It's kind of like the collar you put around them so they can pull your cart or they can plow your field, right? And there were instances where one ox was yoked by itself, but that was actually not very common. Because if you get two oxen and you yoke them together, they're actually able to do far more work than just one ox, than two oxen by themselves yoked separately. They're able to do far more together than individually if you added up their effort. And so this is actually something we'll get to as we move on further in our series. You need other people as well. But Jesus is getting at something with this illustration. So he also says in the very next verse, he says, come and learn from me. Learn from me. And he is drawing here on something that everyone in his culture knew about. What you would do with oxen is that you would have a new ox that you wanted to train. Right? Getting an ox to the point where it knew how to pull that yoke effectively actually took a very long time. It took a lot of work and training so that it didn't just stop. It kept going at the right time. It followed orders. Working two together, they had to work as a team. And so what you would do is you would actually take an ox that was very, very experienced and knew what it was doing. And you would yoke it together with an ox that didn't know, a new ox that was just learning. And because they were together, actually what would happen is there would be teaching that would happen by example. The ox, the experienced ox, the newer ox would actually learn how to pull a load because it was with the older ox who already knew. And so this was a way everybody knew that an ox could learn how to pull its load effectively. So what Jesus is saying here is actually quite powerful. He's describing this yoke as his yoke, the yoke that he actually has around his neck, the mission that he's on, the burden that he is pulling. He is saying to you, okay, you want to find rest? Take my burden onto your life. Now, how can that be? That's counterintuitive. Wouldn't that just make me wouldn't that just be more work? But he says no. He says, no, if you take my yoke onto your life, because what will happen then is that you will be yoked together with Jesus, and both you and Jesus will pull the load together. Do you see the illustration here? So yes, you will have a new burden. It will be the burden of you are putting on Jesus' yoke. You are voluntarily saying, I'm going to live life the way that you want me to, Lord Jesus. I'm going to take on the things that you're doing. But as you do that, what you get is him. You get God himself. You get the Holy Spirit active in your life, teaching you and helping you to pull the burdens that are in your life. But there's another piece to this, and I wonder if you've seen it yet. You can't do that just in part. You can't put on that burden, the yoke of Jesus, at the same time as you're off doing your own thing. Can you? You can't do both at the same time. In fact, once you put that yoke on, you will be linked to him, and you'll just be going and doing whatever he does. Because you know what? Actually, he pulls harder than you. You're not going to be able to pull him off of his mission. There's just no way. The only way you can get away from his mission is to take that off of you and go off on your own. But then, guess where you are? You're off on your own. And so what we have here is also a lesson about priorities. Do you see it? If you are thinking of following Jesus, you're thinking of the Bible, and you're thinking of Christianity and religion as just something to get you a little help in your life. You have a plan for your life, and that's the plan you want to follow. You want to be happy, and you want to have, in order to do that, you know that you need to have these things in order. And some of these you're having trouble with, kind of like I was in my early years there with my punching bag and my anger. And you just want a little help from God to succeed in your life. If that's the way you approach it, following Jesus will never be anything more than an extra burden to you. That's the secret. It will never be anything more than an extra burden that just feels like it weighs you down. Church will be, oh, do I have to get up and go? Classes will be, really? Pastor Phil and Pastor Isaac are trying to get me to go to a class? I can't even handle my own life. It will always be like that for you, as long as you're trying to run your own life. Go after your own plan. What you have to do is you have to set that aside. Now, this is an act of trust. It doesn't mean your life is going to be terrible. Actually, your life is going to be great. It's going to be better than it's ever been. Because his plan is far better for you than anything you can come up with on your own. But it's not going to be your own. It's going to be his plan. That's the only way to get into that relationship with him. You see it? Relationship with him. Let's think about this a little bit further with an illustration. And then we'll wrap up just with a couple of observations. I got a picture of a guy up here. This guy is about 27 years old. Anybody seen this guy before? Anybody know who this is? Yeah? Anybody? I'm curious. Okay, I'll give you a name. This is Magnus Carlsen. Anybody heard of Magnus Carlsen? Okay, one person. Einar actually tipped me off to this guy a while ago. He's got a sweet app if you want to put it on your phone. This guy, you can see, you probably guess he has something to do with chess, right? He's holding a chess piece. This guy, Magnus Carlsen, 27 years old, he is the reigning world chess champion. He is from Norway. He is a grandmaster, and he is the best chess player in the world. Now, not only that, he has done some remarkable things. He's held that title for 5 years. He's also, he's broken a whole bunch of world records. Like he holds, how many of you even play chess? This might be a few of you. How many of you have ever played a game of chess in your life? Come on, really? There's some of you who haven't? Okay, try it out. It's really fun. I like chess. All right, so, but this illustration is going to help us, I think. So Magnus Carlsen, he's broken a whole bunch of records. He actually holds 3 different world championship titles in chess. Not only is he just the best at chess, period, he's also the best blitz chess player, so speed chess. He also has the highest ranking of any chess player in history. In history. And he's the youngest one who's ever done it. So all of those things, the youngest one to do all of those things. Okay, so this guy is crazy good at chess. This app that Einar showed me a while ago, you can actually play him at different ages. You can play him when he's 5 years old, and then you can play him when he's 7, and play him when he's 8. Okay, I finally beat him when he's 8 years old. Yes, yes. Okay, I can't beat him when he's 9 yet. I'm working on that. He really started practicing chess a lot after he was 9. Now, I want you to imagine for a minute that you're sitting there trying to play chess, okay? Or just that you were interested in playing chess. I know not all of you are, but let's imagine that's something you were interested in learning. In fact, you had been trying hard, reading some chess books, but you're progressing a little bit, and then all of a sudden you get a knock on your door. Okay, you're trying to learn chess because maybe you want to beat your dad, or you want to beat your brother, or you want to beat a friend. All of a sudden you get a knock on your door. Boom, boom, boom. You open the door, and there's Magnus Carlsen at your front door. And I mean, this guy, look, he's kind of cool, too. He's actually a little bit like a chess rock star. I don't know if there is such a thing, but if there was such a thing, Magnus Carlsen is a chess rock star. He's also a snowboarder, and he does, like, massive flips on the snowboard, kind of like Liam. Okay, so he's this chess rock star. He's knocking on your door. And you're like, whoa, you're Magnus Carlsen. What are you doing at my house? Magnus Carlsen says, hey, you. He knows your name, though. He doesn't just say you. He says, hey, you. I've decided I would like to personally train you to be an awesome chess player. Whoa, I mean, your jaw hits the floor. Okay, so imagine you actually like chess, and this is something you want to do here, okay? So you're pumped. Okay, so what would your reaction be? Would you be like, oh, no, I'm kind of busy right now, Magnus Carlsen. Maybe you could come back another day? If chess were something that were important to you, you would drop everything to train. What if Magnus said to you, I got 4 weeks, I'm going to train you, and then I got to go back, I got to go to another chess tournament. What would your next 4 weeks look like? Man, you'd take off of work, if this was something you really wanted to do, you'd take off of work, you'd tell all your friends all the other plans you had, boom, they're going right out of the calendar. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to be trained by the best in the world, the Grand Master. Just if that doesn't click with you, if you're not grabbing onto that illustration, just grab something else. Imagine you were struggling in math, and Albert Einstein showed up at your door to tutor you in math. Would you be like, oh, actually, no, I don't have time right now, Al. I'm really busy. Or once you started tutoring with him, if he gave you instructions, would you follow them? Or would you show up to Albert Einstein's math tutoring lesson and you haven't done your homework? No, you would not. Because this is the best in the world. And you know that in this area, if you follow what this person is training you on, you will become better than you could ever have been. Now listen up. This is exactly the situation every single one of us is in with respect to Jesus and our life as a whole. Look at it. You got the Grand Master of life itself. The one who really knows what it's like to live a human life that works. Nobody else knows. Nobody. He's actually done it. And he, through his word, through his people, directly by his Spirit, is right here all the time calling out to you, look, just come. Come to me and learn from me, and I will show you how you can live in a way where you won't be overwhelmed anymore. Stuff will still come at you in your life. There's still going to be storms. He promises that, but you will be able to stand through the storm. Because on the inside, you've taken in what you need. You're now breathing, whereas before you were just holding your breath and barely treading water. And he is offering to you this ability, this training program. And so our last question, our last fill in the blank for today is this. Will you accept the offer to be personally mentored by the Grand Master of life? Will you accept it? Or are you going to look at the Grand Master of life and say, you know what, I'm too busy. I got too much else going on. I'm too busy trying to run this life that you gave me. And so I'm too busy to listen to you on how to actually live it. As we finish up this morning with our message, I just want you to think about some steps that you could take. We have provided a whole lot of opportunities right now. Fall has started. We've got classes on Sunday morning. Those classes are there for this very reason, that you could breathe in the wisdom of God and then succeed in these different areas of life. We've got classes. We've got church on Sunday mornings. We are here for this very reason, to breathe in the truth of God and then put it into practice once we leave here, so that we could not be overwhelmed. We could follow where he is leading. We've got this new message series, Breathe. It's just 4 weeks. I would challenge you, come for these 4 weeks. Try to put these things into practice and just see. Maybe you're watching this online today because it was too hard for you to get up this morning because you're overwhelmed in your life. It was too hard for you to come into church. Come next week. Make that effort. Take his yoke upon you, his way, and see what happens if you commit to those 4 weeks. We've got community groups starting up. All of these things, opportunities that we have. Taking that next step that God has for you. It's only a burden if you're trying to do everything else on your own. But if you're willing to make it a priority, you will see that it becomes the source, most powerful part of life, because that's where the wisdom of God is at. Why don't you pray with me, and then we'll worship together with one more song.